just a second here. All right, and can we turn on closed captioning as well? And then we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jesus Pantel. I'm the Cultural Funding Supervisor here at the City of Austin Cultural Arts Division in the Economic Development Department. I will be facilitating day 2 of the Thrive Review Panel today. Co-facilitating with me will be Priscilla Hale. As y'all know, we've revamped our funding programs, and so Priscilla is helping ensure that we keep equity at top of mind while we are conducting these review panels. And Priscilla, is there anything you'd like to say?
Just want to say welcome to the panelists and to the attendees. I'm excited to be here to take part in this program that is in support of developing organizations and cultural institutions by for communities that are at risk for immediate cultural erasure and displacement within Austin. So thank you all for
Thank you, Priscilla. And yes, thank you, panelists. Thank you for everyone who's in attendance. Again, we are recording this. It's 3 days of panels. We recorded yesterday's panel as well, and we'll be recording tomorrow's if you would like to watch them. We may be going slightly out of order from the agenda that we had sent y'all on Friday. One of our panelists has to leave at 1 o'clock, between 1 and 1:15. So we're going to have her go. So that's Lisa Bird. She will be going first to make sure all the ones that she is a primary on, or at least, in that 1 o'clock hour for the first 45 minutes or so, can get those in. She will be watching the recording tonight. So that way, if she has any changes to scores tomorrow on day 3, we can do that. Something different that we're doing this year, in addition to no interaction between the panelists and the attendees, is that after we've reviewed all of the 59 that have advanced to the semifinals, we'll go over who the top 35 are. And so we want to, that'll give panelists a chance to, go over any comments that may have changed their scores, hearing what, the other panelists had to say. We will also we have a maximum time limit of 10 minutes for each application. The timing will not start until the primary reviewer starts giving their comments. And if for some reason we run into any technical difficulties, we will pause the recording and we will pause the timer on that application. So that's not going to eat into the 10 minutes allotted for your time. I think that is the big announcements I have to make before we get started. So we will be getting started. Let me pull up our list. And so the first application up for review is Austin International Drag Foundation. Lisa and DJ are our primary and secondary. We may take a little bit of time in between each application, just since it is on the online portal system. We'll need to finalize the scores and close out and open up the new one. So there may be a little bit of time in between. And again, the timing will not start until the primary starts giving their comments. So Lisa, whenever you are ready for Austin International Drag Foundation.
Thank you, Jesus. All right. This is great. So Austin, I'm trying to get my screen here. Austin International Drag Foundation. Great to read their application. I scored them on the high side. I felt that their mission, of course, was very appropriate for the Thrive Grant. I thought that their cultural leadership really reflected their organization, and that the work that the community that they are servicing. I thought that they could explain better. I was looking for a better explanation under intersectionality. And I know that's that can be a hard concept to transpose into activities. but I was looking for that. Let's see. I thought that their response to accessibility was really great. And I thought that their opportunity creation really provided opportunity for Austin drag performers and support of that community. So for all those reasons, I thought it was a great application and scored them in the high.
Thank you. Secondary, that will be DJ.
Good morning or good afternoon. So on this particular proposal, this one scored one of my highest out of all the proposals. I am in about 90% agreement with my colleague, Lisa. I did find that they handled their entire proposal hinged on intersectionality. And when I looked at that in total, along with what they put in that particular section, I felt that it was very strong, very inclusive. The things I like the most is that it's an all ages endeavor, and they have support for local small business built into their planning and activities, regardless of whether of sexual orientation or gender identity. I like that they're 100% volunteer led for the particular event that they're planning to host. Very family focused, a lot of emphasis put on that. And for me, everything that they stand for is brave and defiant and resilient, especially during these times. And I thought that of note of their all inclusivity was their attention to include the disabled and give opportunity to the disabled. And at a time, what the Thrive Grant stands for is those in most jeopardy of cultural erasure or displacement. And I can't think of an organization that is facing that challenge more than this particular community. And so for all those reasons, I scored them very high.
Thank you, DJ. At this time, we'd like to invite other panelists to offer any additional comments.
This is Savita. Oh, go ahead, Mia.
This is me. I, for the most part, agree with what Lisa and DJ said. Some areas where I think I differ just a little bit is for community relationships. There was a heavy emphasis on sponsors, and I really would have liked to have seen how your specific community, how the specific LGBTQ community supports the organization, whether that's volunteers or anything like that. I would have liked to see a little more conversation about that here. And with the cultural institution status, I was concerned that a large bulk of the funds is going to programming and production expenses. And I was concerned about how that is going to stabilize the organization and allow for growth when such a large portion of these funds are going directly towards production, which don't necessarily have the longevity there. But overall, I thought this was a great application and scored it relatively high as well.
I echo Mia in that I had a few concerns about the budget as well, especially given how much of it went towards programming. So that's one of the things that I wanted to pull up and point out. The budget also did not describe how other funds would be used to strengthen the operations, for example. So there are two columns and the second column was completely empty. So that would have been helpful to kind of state to us that, okay, we're using Thrive funding for programming, but we're using all of our other funds we're not putting anything into programming, but we're putting that into operations. If that had been clearly explained, that would have made it a much stronger application. I wanted to also call out how wonderful it was to see that a parent of a trans child was on the board, bringing in that voice, which is a community, people who are so afraid right now to give them an opportunity to have a voice in an organization like this was fantastic. And I wanted to extend my congratulations to the organization for making sure that those voices are also included in their decision-making and leadership. Overall, I thought this was a very valuable nonprofit to exist in our community, and scored it very high as well.
Ursula,
Yeah, I am in agreement with what I've heard so far, and wanted to bring attention to something that I was very impressed with, was their dedication to paying the artists well, and focusing on that, I think, is paramount to actually keeping art alive during a gentrification. And so they clearly prioritized leading each artist, not only through exposure and community building, but also financially, which I think is very powerful, and shows that they're going to reach a large community and support them. So that was something that I had in my notes that I was very impressed by, and was part of my high scoring.
thank you all.
If it's okay, I just want to circle back because I did have a note about the budget. And so I just want to, that was also something that I noted, that the budget, that 90% of the expenditures, I think, went directly to paying artists, which is absolutely wonderful. But in terms of institution building, we would have liked to have seen at least some of the funds used toward capacity building, consulting, or something that would lead to more stabilization, and not just going from event to event. So yeah.
Thank you, panelists. Any further comments? If there are no further comments, if you would please finalize your scores. And again, it may take just a moment for the panelists to finalize their scores and then move on to the next application. Something I did not mention at the beginning while we're having them get ready is that the panelists have reviewed and tentatively scored all of the applications prior to today, actually prior to yesterday. And so they will be discussing the applications and potentially changing their scores. They're not required to change their scores, but they might, depending on how the conversation goes. And so the next application up for review is is Anthropos Arts. Lisa and Savita are our primary and secondary. And Lisa, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay, Anthropos Arts, I scored on the low end. And as I walk through the scorings, my first was about the mission. And the relationship of the mission to the Thrive guidelines, not guidelines, but the Thrive focus and goals. And just really want to be certain that the mission of the organization is really supporting what Thrive is trying to do. And as we look at their the cultural leadership was good. the intersectionality, again, I think we have to have a real understanding of what that means and how that relates to the activities and to the communities that they serve. And lastly, again, I didn't feel that the budget reflected growing and stabilizing an organization for the long term. Those are my comments. There were accessibility. I thought they handled well, and I thought that they had provide real opportunities for a community that they're serving. It's just that I'm not sure that that community is a part of what Thrive is trying to do.
Thank
Those are
you. Thank you, Lisa. Secondary, Sabita?
Thank you, Jesus. So I scored this organization in the middle category, not very high, because my main concern and where I was not able to score them very high was in their cultural leadership section. So this is an organization whose mission is to serve low-income youth, and yet the application did not describe how many of the people on the board and in leadership roles are from low-income communities or are experiencing that themselves. There are one person was explicitly called out as from a low-income background, but none of the others. So for that reason, that section they scored low. I do have to say that I was impressed with the number of students. 100% of their high school seniors go on to college, complete high school, 90% go on to college with scholarship. Those are very impressive numbers, and I just wanted to call them out on that and congratulate them on that. The other piece that was very impressive with this application was that the graduates of this program continue to be engaged. For example, at the 25th anniversary show, they're going to have an alumni performance. All the performers will be alumni. So that was really impressive to see. The accessibility for me was also an issue in that it was primarily around the ADA compliance and the fact that some of the folks that they work with and some of the teachers already speak the same language. I'm not sure about how much of the intentionality is expressed in the application. I'm sure there is a lot of that work that goes on. It just was not called out in the application. And so for these reasons, I've graded them in the middle to low, the lower end of the high scale. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, we'd like to invite the additional panelists to add any other observations that you would want to add.
Something that I really appreciated that seemed that I didn't see in any other application was that they were offering transportation to families so that they could participate in the live performances of their children. This felt really impactful and thoughtful, and had, I think, a representation of a holistic approach of considering the families as a whole and not just the children outside of the family unit. And so that is why I gave them a higher score, especially under cultural and social impact. That was something that I thought was unique to this application that I did appreciate.
I agree with the last panelist, her assessment, and I scored them in the mid-high range. The things that I really appreciated that have not been discussed so far is how much of an opportunity, a worthwhile opportunity, an organization like this presents to young musicians, heavily Hispanic, who have the opportunity at a time when schools are continuing to cut music education programs, and understanding the correlation between music and educational attainment. I don't think it's lost on any of us the importance of organizations like this, and something that I know that I continue to grapple with as a panelist is for organizations that are requesting funds for use for an event as opposed to long-term structural programs. You know, are we weighing the potential impact of said events on the community, the long-term impacts, because an event can have a long-term impact as well as a program. And so I think that is worth mentioning in this realm. And I also appreciate that they have a music loan program, an instrument loan program. So very thoughtful about the constituency that they're serving with wraparound services, meeting their constituents where they're at is commendable, and I'd like to recognize that.
Thank you, panelists. Any additional comments? If there are no further comments, if you would please finalize your scores. And while they're finalizing the scores for Anthropos, next up on deck is Great Promise for American Indians. So finalizing their scores on that one. Next up for review, Great Promise for American Indians. Lisa and Mia are our primary and secondary. And Lisa, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay. Lots of screen movement here. Great Promise. For American Indians, I scored very high. And my overall comment, my overall note to myself is I think Austin's Native population is an excellent example of how Thrive funding can support cultural sustainability. The Great American Promise has been providing cultural activities long enough to be considered a cultural institution. And I see that funding will assist them in strengthening their infrastructure. And I scored them on the high in every category. With a little thought and deduction around accessibility. Again, knowing that accessibility needs to be very intentional, and so that I hope to see that more intentionality in all of the applicants around accessibility. Other than that, I felt this was a strong application, and it's my comment.
Thank you. Secondary, Mia?
I agree with Lisa. I thought this was a really strong application. I scored it very highly. I thought they articulated really, really well where they're at in terms of becoming a cultural institution. And they seem to have a clear picture of what they need in order to make that happen. So I appreciated that about the application. yeah, had very similar thoughts to Lisa, the overall great application.
Thank you. Now we'd like to invite the other panelists to add anything.
I agree with the two panelists that were before, and think that this is one of the strongest proposals that I had the privilege to read.
I concur as well. This scored really high on my scale as well.
And I have nothing new to add because I am in full agreement with the panel so far. And with what Lisa said, the only points that were missing from mine were the intentionality and accessibility. But other than that, it was a benchmark for me that I was measuring other applications to. Was so strong.
Did we
Thank
get
you.
did we get what Ursula said? Just it looked like she was freezing over here to me a little bit. So I don't know if it's happening with other folks.
She was freezing
Are
a
you
little
having
bit, but
issues with my? Is my microphone?
I think you're
Can
freezing
you
a
hear
little
me?
bit. I think when you start talking, sometimes you're freezing a little bit. And we just want to make sure that we
Oh.
capture. But I think if folks felt like we got it in the recording,
it sounded clear enough to me. There was a little bit
Okay.
of freezing, but sounds like everybody's in agreement that this was a strong application. I will remind the panelists and the applicants in attendance that we do not compare one application to another. Each application is scored on how it addresses the review criteria. But with that being said, you can talk about what you see that may be unique or different in this application that you may not have seen in others. But we are, again, not comparing one application to another, just how they meet the review criteria. It sounds like everybody has, done with their comments. So if you would please finalize your scores, and we will move on to the next application. And that will be Austin Chinese American Network. Ursula and Savita are our primary and secondary. Again, the 10-minute max for each application review will not start until the primary starts giving their commentary. So Ursula, whenever you are ready to begin.
All right, and can you hear me okay? There was an issue with my, okay, great. Just, I closed out a few more windows, so hopefully that will help. So for this application, I was most impressed by the different aspects of Chinese culture that they were bringing to schools. There was such a diversity from food to visual arts to language to dance. I thought that created a great opportunity for a lot of different communities who were not from the Chinese community to find resonance and something to participate with and relate to. And so I thought that their whole approach of not just focusing on one aspect of Chinese culture, but many facets, I thought that would be that was an effective approach. And I also appreciated that they mentioned that 60% is focused on Chinese heritage and culture, and 40% was focused on overall community service. That kind of helped me see some more value for the entire community to be affected and impacted. But I wasn't fully convinced or clear on the level of cultural erasure, which is something that I'm pretty, it's a priority of what we're looking for. So I wish I was leaving wanting more for that aspect of this application, which also affected the intersectionality and inclusion score for me, because they're working with children in schools. I wanted to understand more clearly their relationship to kids who are identifying with LGBTQIA+ community. I did appreciate that they were focusing on exposure to the outdoors. And also, I did score fairly low on accessibility. It didn't seem to be a priority, but I did appreciate that they did mention that funding would affect how they address accessibility moving forward. But that still did give, I did give a lower score for that overall.
Thank you. Secondary, Savita.
Thank you. So for this application, I scored in the lower end of the high range, so to say. I thought it was a strong application. My questions, or rather where I lacked information from the proposal, were in a couple of areas. When I was looking at the intersectionality and inclusion section, for example, there is, especially in the youth development program spaces, the proposal speaks about opportunities for minority youth, but it doesn't tell you who the minority youth are. It speaks about Austin being 70, majority minority, but how and why they're choosing certain schools to expand into, where they're offering programs. The description in the proposal was insufficient to get an understanding as far as who they are focused on, as far as their programmatic pieces go. I thought, as far as community relationships go, they have very strong investment from the Chinese American community here, so that was great to see. There are a variety of programs, but in accessibility, I had an issue as well, in that even the ADA compliance was not explicitly addressed. It is whatever is available, and that's assumed. It's not intentionally addressed in the proposal. There are programs to engage the broader Austin community, but I did not again see, as far as translations, etc. go, it's Chinese and English only. There wasn't any additional languages or opportunities to connect with other communities that might be interested in learning more or being a part of the celebrations and opportunities that this organization provides. Those were some of the points that I noted as I reviewed this particular application.
Thank you, Savita. I'd like to invite other panelists to add any additional comments that they may have different.
I can go. I scored this group in the lower upper, against the lower upper. I thought it was a strong application. Savita, I had questions about the intersectionality. My response actually was to the word minority. It showed for me really a lack of understanding of what intersectionality is and the positioning of communities of color in Austin. And so just might suggest that some more education is needed around that, especially as they work with young people in the schools that they're targeting. And so, and also around accessibility, again, my mantra is kind of an intentionality. And it wasn't about language. And I want to say that because I think cultural organizations really need to live within their authenticity and invite us in, right? And so, so maybe that is an opportunity for us to learn a language, right? So, So it wasn't, the accessibility wasn't so much around the language, but around more than wherever there is ADA compliance.
Mia, did you?
I don't have much more to add here. I kind of echo everything that has already been said, but I just want to like highlight again intention throughout this application. For me, there was quite a few points in here where it didn't feel intentional that certain statements were made, whether that's accessibility. It doesn't seem like an intentional focus, or intersectionality didn't feel like an intentional focus. So that was my kind of big takeaway from this, but overall, I kind of agree with everyone else.
I agree with my fellow panelists and don't really have much else to add.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. If there are no further comments, if you would please finalize your scores. And the next application up for review will be Red Salmon Arts. Mia and DJ are our primary and secondary. And again, the time will not start until the primary starts giving their comments. So Mia, whenever you are ready to begin.
Okay. Overall, I thought this was a pretty good application. I scored it in the mid to high range. I know we're all using different terms to describe that range, but mid to high. Some areas that they lost a few points for me is in the activity section. It didn't demonstrate enough that they were being responsive to the current needs of their community. So I would have liked to see a little more detail there to explain why certain activity choices are made and how they're responsive. Same accessibility, lacked a little bit of information about any specialized services. Would have liked to see that. And for the cultural institution narrative piece, I would have liked to see a little more detail about how their outlined investments would actually further the organization. The statements kind of felt like they just stopped. I just needed a little bit more to understand how this would take you from point A to point B. And I think that would have made a stronger application. But yeah, other than that, overall, I thought it was a pretty strong application.
Thank you. Secondary, DJ?
I scored this particular one on the low end of the mid-range. I struggled personally with, I would have liked to have seen a stronger statement in their mission, defining what their mission was. I thought early on I was reading about a literary program, and then later it felt like we strayed away from that mission somewhat and talked a lot about things that weren't directly related to literary activities. And I'm sure that that could just be lost in the translation of the words that were used to make the arguments that they made, but it was very heavily programmatic or event specific. And some of it was literary based, but then a lot of it wasn't. So that could have been stronger for me. What I did like about this particular group is that they were long-serving and they showed intentionality for age inclusion. So I like the comment that they had programming for 9 to 80. So a wide range. My minuses, my takeaways, things that I scored lower on was when the statement was made that funding would be used for event planning early on, and then later on in the budget, it shows that it could be used for administrative purposes. So there was a bit of a disconnect there for me. And for those reasons, I scored the way that I did.
Thank you, DJ. We'd like to invite other panelists to offer any different. Savita, do you have anything you'd like to add? Lisa?
I actually scored them on the higher side. Though I did note this kind of, as DJ, you said, a disconnect in the budget. I did note that. So that made me think about the, the cultural institution, how can they build that infrastructure? I noted that that there was a focus on marketing, so yeah. So, but I did note the budget disconnect.
Ursula, did you have anything you'd like to add?
Everything that I needed has already been talked about, so I am in agreement with what has been said so far.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. If there are no further comments, if you would please finalize your scores. All right, and the next application up for review will be ICMCA. Savita and Mia are our primary and secondary. And Savita, whenever you're ready to begin.
Thank you. So with this application, I scored them in the lower end of the high scale. So again, using all kinds of terminology, but that is where we are. Some of the things that were interesting to me, I want to start off by saying, again, ICMCA events are very popular in the South Indian community, the Indian community here in Austin. I've attended music concerts, events that they've hosted. It's wonderful. It's great to have this organization in the community. So just want to state that. I was impressed, and I did not know this about the organization, that the new focus on immigrant communities, refugee communities, especially from Afghanistan and the other areas surrounding India. That was a really thoughtful, I think, response to current situation and current communities within the greater Austin area. I thought that the leadership was held by community members of the broader Indian members of Indian origin. What the proposal did not describe was whether there was representation of the refugee community and from smaller countries in the South Asian diaspora represented on the leadership teams. That was not well described. I thought cultural and social impact, the things that really impressed me were the fact that they're looking at Qawwali and Katha, two very unique and marginalized art forms here in the greater Austin area. You don't hear of many Qawwali recitals or Katha presentations. These are highly regional and specific, that they're looking to bring those into the mainstream of the ICMCA productions. I thought that was very interesting. And the Shakti festival that they are putting on will be highly relevant to the Indian diaspora. I thought that was cool. And I did not score them very high on opportunity creation because the description was all about college letters of recommendation to students who are going off to good universities, volunteer opportunities for youth, those kinds of things, not quite so much about the impact on the community in the long run. Accessibility also they scored low because it was primarily about ADA compliance and large print materials to a certain extent, not very intentional. I think that their budget describes that they are putting in funds to grow as a cultural institution and are providing some staffing and capital campaign expenses through the Thrive Grant, so that it is in line with what we are expecting to see from Thrive Grant applicants. So overall, a strong application, scoring in the lower end of the high range.
Thank you, Savita. Secondary, Mia?
Yeah, so I had this scored somewhere in the middle. I actually want to say thank you, Savita, for providing a little context for some of the cultural activities. So I'm probably going to look again and look at and review this with that knowledge now. But for the most part, I echo most of Savita's sentiments. I had a little concern about the cultural leadership not being representative of the smaller countries in the region. Same with accessibility. Yeah, I don't really have much more to add.
We'd like to invite other panelists to add. DJ, are you off? Okay. You're off mute, but are you wanting to speak?
I didn't realize I was off mute. My apologies. No, I share in the sentiments that Savita, as usual, you bring such context to the happenings in the South Asian community, and I'm so grateful for that. It is impactful to hear you speak about actually attending and what you're getting from these activities, and it will help, as Ursula has already stated, in scoring, reevaluating some of the scoring. So thank you.
Yes, Savita, thank you for bringing our attention to that. That's just the detail of information that's really appreciated. And thank you very much for adding that. I too, the accessibility was the I scored them in the low highs, the low highs, which may be the high mids. But for me, the major thing that stuck out was the accessibility. But again, thank you for those comments about the work itself.
I also am in agreement with what's been said so far. Something I wanted to bring attention was what I was most impressed by was the clear community support and cooperation that was talked about in their history of service, as well as their opportunity creation, just how the whole community comes together to host visiting artists and supports one another, really stuck out for me with this specific application, which was impressive.
Anyone else? Good. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. If there are no further comments, if you would please finalize your scores. And the next application up for review is Prizer Arts and Letters. DJ and Savita are our primary and secondary. And DJ, whenever you are ready to begin.
Okay, so for Prizer Arts, things that I really want to commend them on is that they are a broad serving institution that has proven to be very flexible and nimble over the years. They are one of these organizations that have done a lot with a little. I scored them in the mid-range, and the reason for that primarily is their biggest strengths to me are also represent some of their weaknesses, at least in the proposal, because they do so much. They're such a broad serving institution. I found it difficult to narrow down specifically what community is centered in their work. In 2020, they did a pivot that involved, they began paying honorariums to the people that they would bring in to speak about their art. And, you know, I want to commend them for that, especially with an institution that relies heavily on cash donations for their funding. Some of the things that I would have liked to have seen stronger in their proposal was helping me to understand their cultural leadership strategy. Although their leadership lives in or near their target community, as specified in that section, they don't reflect that community. So that was something that I deducted for. And when they spoke about intersectionality and how that plays into their planning, it left me feeling that there may be some room for some additional training and understanding of intersectionality and how we are using it in regards to this grant. It felt very vague to me and very unintentional, as well as their plans for accessibility. And so those are the things that I would have liked to have seen a stronger emphasis in details in their proposal. And for that reason, I scored them in the mid-range.
Thank you, DJ. Secondary, Savita.
Thank you, DJ. I also scored them in the mid-range, as DJ said, and I concur. For me, this particular proposal lacked specificity. By that, I mean the community, the mission is just broadly East Austin. And so it was focused, the entire proposal was focused on East Austin, as the cultural leadership is from there, the programs are in there, in that community. But I was left wanting more detail on who in East Austin, or which particular communities, or which particular areas are they focused on, because East Austin is gentrifying so rapidly. So who are you thinking about and who are you talking about? And so that specificity was lacking in the application for me. I also thought that it was lacking in the accessibility section. It was broadly ADA compliant and not much more beyond that. So, but I did think that their proposal budget did describe how they were going to use the funds to become stronger operationally. So that was a good thing. But overall, I could have used more detail, more clarity. It felt very broad strokes as far as the application programs, everything that they were discussing in this particular application.
Thank you. At this time, we'd like to invite the additional panelists to add anything that they'd like to add.
I'll jump in. I scored them on the lower end, and I think for me, it was initially I was not sure about the mission. There was a lot, and I think, as you said, Savita, it was kind of just East Austin, and that's like a geographic area. So I'm not quite certain. I wasn't quite certain how to take the mission. And so it's hard for me to go from there to the other sections because I wasn't quite clear of what the mission was. So I would just ask, just say that a more succinct and pointed mission would have been very helpful.
Anyone else?
If there are no further comments, if you would please finalize your scores. And as you're finalizing your scores, we will take a break here. We'll take, let's see, we're pretty much on schedule with where we need to be. It is 1:12. Let's take a 5-minute break. We will be back at 1:17. And so we can go ahead and pause the recording now. Alrighty, and we are back from our break on day 2 of the Thrive Review panel. One of our panelists did have to leave. We are recording these proceedings, so she will watch the recording. If she has any comments that differ from what the panelists that are present here have said, she will be able to change her score at that time. And also if she has anything that was said that was not said by the other panelists, she will have the opportunity to do that tomorrow. Reminder, we are doing panels a little bit differently than how the Cultural Arts Division has done them in the past. Once we review all 59 applications, we will see who the top 35 are, and the panel will discuss to make sure if those are indeed the ones they feel should be receiving the Thrive Award funding. So we will be starting back up. Next application up for review is ODC. Mia and Savita are our primary and secondary. And again, there's a 10-minute max for each application, and that 10-minute time limit will not start until the primary starts giving their comments. So Mia, whenever you are ready to begin.
Okay. So I scored this application in the mid to high range. I thought they had a clear mission. I like that their leadership reflected the community that they're serving. Some areas that I had some concerns or needed a little bit more information. When it came to intersectionality, they demonstrated that they're interested in addressing it in the organization, but not how it's actually manifesting. For example, they mentioned that, they cater to different groups, and one of them being like mothers, young mothers, but how do you provide and how do you make sure that your programs are intersectional and respect the fact that, they're mothers and South Asian women and all of that. There was just a piece there that was missing for me. And with the budget, I saw that it outlined a heavy investment in production costs. And I was concerned how that will stabilize and sustain the organization moving forward. I needed more detail about, how they were going to grow to become that cultural institution beyond just the production costs. I think those are my primary notes.
Thank you. Secondary, Savita.
Thank you, Jesus. I thought this was also a very good application, but few pieces were not very clear in the proposal, so they were ranked in the mid to high range for me. The areas where I had a few concerns or where it was not clear to me from reading the application were in the section on cultural and social impact. So the programming definitely advances cultural heritage. It leans on this ancient, very very beautiful art form, but how exactly does that translate to current circumstances and the current socio-political environment? That was not very clear as far as, especially because they are planning to commission 3 original pieces. For me, that was an incredibly good opportunity to talk about what those commissioned pieces would be about and to bring in the cultural, current socioeconomic environment into that. But that was the part that was missing in the proposal. So that was one area where I was not able to score high on the application. The second was around intersectionality. As Mia said, there was a desire to be intersectional, but not clear description in the proposal on how that intersectionality would manifest. And then I loved the recommendation letters where the mother was talking about how her daughter did not have an opportunity at all to learn Odissi dance anywhere, and how this was the group that brought it all together and how she's still in touch. So clearly it is something that is of value to the community, but accessibility was an issue for me. And then the funding piece as well, that so much of the requested funding is being invested into production costs, into bringing artists from India, these types of things, while it is still a grassroots organization and not much is being allocated towards growing the infrastructure for the organization. So that is another area where I had to take, where I would have liked to get more information and more detail. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, we'd like to invite the other panelists. And Ursula, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I agree with a lot of what's already been said. Some notes that I have from this specific application that were a concern to me was the focus on using funding to bring in outside artists, and the focus, there was a great focus on tourism. And well, I think I wanted to see a little more focus on funding for the local community and the local artists. And that's why some of my scoring was not as high as some others, as I'm really looking for a focus on the local artists to be supported instead of bringing in outside and catering to tourism. So those were my main concerns with this application.
Anyone else that hasn't spoken?
Ursula took the words out of my mouth. That was my primary concern too, is that there didn't seem to be enough focus on the local artists, opportunities for local artists. Although I do commend the broad aspirations of this organization and what they seek to accomplish.
So as a point of clarification, staff has not reviewed the applications in depth. So I'm not sure if this is about the audience or like the actual artists coming to perform, but just so the panelists know, our source of funding is the hotel occupancy tax. So there does need to be a public component where it is open to tourists who, will come to Austin and, spend nights at the hotels for the hotel occupancy tax. With that being said, that's still, a good comment to note about, balancing both tourists and local residents as well. But just for your scoring considerations, panel, please note that since it is hotel occupancy tax that funds this program, there does need to be a tourism component or a public component that is open to tourists. And Savita, I think you have a question or a comment?
No, I just wanted to comment as well that this is incredibly difficult to master art form. So this is something that dancers spend an entire 20, 30 years getting to a level where they can perform publicly. And therefore, it might not be possible to have local artists, but it could be the inspiration to get the masters and the, well-established performers from India, because that's the only place where you might have performers of that caliber, and that would attract tourism to Austin. So just wanted to make that counterpoint about that statement.
Thank you, Savita. That's very helpful input there.
Yes, thank you, Savita. Any further comments? If there are no further comments, if you would please finalize your scores. All righty, while we're finalizing the scores, I know it'll take a few moments to get ready before the next one is ready for review. So finalizing your scores on ODC, and then the next application up for review is unlisted projects. DJ and Ursula are our primary and secondary. And DJ, whenever you are ready to begin.
Okay, for unlisted projects, this particular proposal had a very transnational focus in its mission. And early on, I was a little unsure of how many artists they served that had that were rooted in Austin. And then later on in the application, there was a statement made that they would be focusing on serving 6 artists from the Austin community. So I would have liked to have seen a stronger, more clarification on that early on. And just overall, I didn't find a conclusive argument for how the mission of this organization aligns with the goals of this particular grant. It had service to Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And I would have liked to have seen a through line, a clearer through line of how that communities, or those communities, would be in risk and any jeopardy of cultural erasure. And so for this reason, I scored this application fairly low.
Thank you. Secondary, Ursula?
Again, where she took the words out of mouth. So my main concern was local support for Austin artists, and that was pretty much the essence of why my score was not as high as some other applications. Their board was one of the largest we've seen, but it did appear to be representative of the community they're serving. But it is a bit of a concern to me when you have that many people in leadership roles, just in what you can get done if you're looking for consensus. But overall, I am in agreement with you, Jen.
Thank you. I'd like to invite the other panelists to speak up and add any additional comments. And Mia, I'd like to see if you have any.
Yeah, I feel like I maybe was reading a different application. I scored this one really high. And I'd like to go back and read this again to just confirm why I scored this one so high. Yeah, I don't have words right now, so
Do you have any comments that you noted that you could state what your initial thoughts were?
not really. No, like I said, I gave this a really high score, and so I didn't provide a lot of notes for myself. And that is on me. So I'm gonna go back and read through this again. I think after this meeting, just to confirm my thoughts. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have more to offer it in this moment. I will say there were a few things. I thought their commitment to accessibility was strong. They explained a few accommodations and how they're working on an audit to inform, future things related to accessibility. Yeah, I'm gonna go back through and read this again to confirm my scores. But yeah.
Thank you. So did you have anything that you'd like to add?
Just that, again, it was very interesting to see the diversity of funding. There is the Mexican ministry, cultural ministry, and then the Danish cultural ministry. The diversity of communities coming together for this grant was very interesting to see, and how they are building out programs for that. The thing that I could have used a little more clarity on is something that DJ touched on as well. Initial sections of the proposal were about focus on Latinx, Mexican, and Black artists. Then there was another section that referred to low-income artists. And then there was another section that was talking about disabled artists. So there was not a very clear through line in this proposal for me. As I was reading, I had to go back and keep making notes. Oh, and they're serving them, and they're serving them, and they're focused on such and such. So for those reasons, primarily, I scored them in the middle to the lower end of the high scale. I thought it was fascinating, the kinds of programs that they were doing, and I'm grateful that they exist in the Greater Austin community to support writers.
Thank you, panelists. If there are no further comments, if you would please finalize your scores. And while you're finalizing your scores, we'll get ready to move on to the next application. So the next application up for review is AFTV 5. Ursula and Lisa are our primary and secondary. Ursula's our primary. And then Ursula, whenever you are ready to begin.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get all of my tabs in order. Okay, I had one main issue with this particular proposal, and that was in the cultural leadership. From my understanding, there wasn't a focus on the cultural backgrounds of the leadership, so I did go to the website, and the photo that is displayed on their About Us from the website is majority white presenting people, and the cultural background of the leadership was not explicit. And then in the intersectionality aspect, when talking about African and African American community, it was in third person and not first person, which seemed like the leadership again is not representative of the communities they're talking about serving. And this was concerning to me when talking about connecting African businesses to what they describe as very broad business, entrepreneurs, and government. And there's no direct description of if the African businesses are being connected to people from in the community that is also connected to African culture, or if it's just a community that's being led by who are not within the African and Black community of Austin. And this felt very disconnected from what the Thrive Grant is looking to do. So I didn't give a very high score for this one because of that aspect of the proposal. If there was strong leadership within the African community and people of African descent, I would have appreciated some more transparency and clarity on that, because for me that seemed a bit concerning.
Thank you, Ursula. As a bit of a clarity for the panelists, and you did say white presenting, so you know, but it is hard to tell race or ethnicity just by a picture. So just keep that in mind when you're considering your scores. With that being said, if the information, and again, staff has not reviewed these applications in depth, so if that information was not there or was difficult to find in the application itself, then that is a good comment to make. And then I'll open it up to other, oh yes, Ursula, yes.
I did want to say that I did appreciate what they are offering as form as a service of helping businesses grow their media platforms. I do think that's incredibly important in business today, especially. So I do believe that what they're offering has a lot of value. And I acknowledge that.
We don't, so I'm sorry, we didn't have the secondary. So at this time, any other panelists that would like to comment would be great, because we don't have a secondary on board right now.
I had the same concerns regarding leadership. It was not apparent to me whether or not they represent the community that they're looking to serve. Also, for the section that was the cultural institution, I had some concerns about their budget. There were big swings with no explanation really provided as to why those swings kind of happened. I also felt like I did not get enough information on how they intend to use the funds. I would have liked to seen a little more detail provided about, again, how this is going to take them from point A to point B. And in that section, there was also a lot of talk about rebuilding the board of directors. And then in a few years, then they'll be on their trek to be a cultural institution. And so I had concerns that they're at the point where they can be a cultural institution if they don't have that correct leadership and board presence in place to help guide and steer the organization. But yeah.
I will also clarify again with the caveat that staff has not reviewed these applications in depth, that for the cultural institution status question, it's kind of talking about the potential, like do they have some of these things, where can they go? But that so just keep that in mind as you're scoring, but it sounds like Mia's comment is still on point, but I just wanted to clarify that for your considerations as you're scoring this particular application in the cultural institution status section.
Anyone else have anything to add before we?
I'm in alignment with what's been said. I had the same concerns and things that stuck out to me are pretty consistent with the panelists that spoke before me.
Thank you, everyone. If there are no further comments, if you would please finalize your scores. All right, and the next application up for review is the Vortex. Mia is our primary. And Mia, the 10-minute max time limit will begin whenever you start making your commentary. So whenever you are ready to begin.
Okay. Overall, I scored this application very, very high. I thought it was very strong, clear mission, great history, and aligned well with what this grant program is looking to do. Let me just bring my notes. I think the biggest kind of downside, I guess I saw within the application was in the activities section. I did not feel that the activities represented that they were responsive to current needs for their audiences and their communities. Other than that, I don't really have much negative things and much feedback to give, other than I thought it was a really great and well put together application and clear. And I think they would be a good fit for this grant program.
Thank you. Comments from other panelists?
I agree with Mia. I scored this one very, very high as well. And I thought that specifically the opportunity creation section of their application was very strong in how they are able to lift up and really provide opportunities for the constituents that they serve. So excellent application.
I want to commend this group for such imaginative language. I felt the words, the words were very intentional. I felt when describing their core values and just what they stand for, their mission and their goals. I just really felt strongly that the words that they chose to use were very intentional and impactful. And I also scored this particular proposal highly. The intersectionality was strong, and their commitment to reaching across communities to be inclusive were very evident. And yeah, I think that this grant is really built for an organization's mission that they outlined here.
Ursula, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I'm in agreement.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. If there are no additional comments, if you would please finalize your scores. All right, so we're finalizing our scores on the previous application. And then the next application up for review will be Uprise Circus. Ursula and DJ are our primary and secondary. And Ursula, whenever you're ready to begin.
All right. I think overall the positive part of this proposal was the intentionality between the mind and body connection and introduce kids to the importance of that. I commend them on that mission. I did have a few concerns. My main concern being when these kids age out of this program, this is a very inaccessible activity to do on your own. So that didn't seem like there would be some longevity for people who have a barrier to financial, to be able to financially access this activity for a long amount of time if they can't stay within the program. I was also concerned about the number of kids reached. They served 32 youth in 2001 and 48 teens in 2022. That's not insignificant, but in compared to some of the other proposals that we're talking about, the reach is not as extensive. And so that was my main concern for funding this particular proposal. Also, the cultural leadership, they acknowledged that the leadership doesn't represent the community they're serving. And I appreciate the acknowledgement, but I think in order for this grant, it does. So I took some points for that, but it's, I do commend them for understanding where they need to grow. And I think that also impacted my intersection inclusion score as well.
Thank you. Secondary, DJ?
All right. This one for me was an amazing opportunity to live in the gray. And what I mean by that is there's nothing black and white about this organization. There just isn't. The idea that they focus on increasing social intelligence through confidence building activities that involves high wire trapeze artistry. It's very difficult to peg an organization like this and put them neatly into any particular box. When I was scoring this, and I'm still thinking about going back again and rescoring some areas, it's very hard, as Savita said earlier, about a particular organization and their dance and the technique and how hard it is to learn that technique and the availability of people who have mastered that art. The same can be said about an organization like this. How many people will know how to be trapeze artists and that can lend their time and talents to helping at-risk youth develop the skills that they need to thrive in their communities? And so for that reason, I believe that this is going to be one of those organizations that have demonstrated that they've done so much with so little. The numbers don't scare me at all, that they've only worked with 36 one year and then 40, forgot the number, 42, I believe it was the next year. That's actually a commendable number of people when you consider what they have to teach these students in order for them to master the skills that they profess to do. And so I encourage I know for me, I believe that this is one of those organizations that just deserve a chance to do more. They have not been funded. They are doing so much with so little. And the spirit of this grant is to provide support for people who have been underfunded and under-resourced traditionally. And I'm going to make a strong argument for Uprise Circus to receive some funding. They are offering it free of charge. It is quite an unusual approach. We know that kids will often respond or they have a strong neuro divergent and intersectionality component. Their accessibility is very thoughtful, very intentional, and they have very little room to be wrong. So for the amount of time that I'm spending on making an argument for this, if this is the equivalent to a golden buzzer, this is my golden buzzer organization. Thank you.
Thank you, DJ. Would like to invite anyone else that want to follow DJ.
How do you follow a golden buzzer, right? But
Right?
I completely agree with DJ. I think she and I are scoring at about the same level for this organization. And again, to other people's point, that an organization that works with youth in such a high-risk environment, there's only so many youth you can serve because of how much infrastructure it requires. I thought the supporting letters were very, very valuable in this case, where they talked about how this organization has stepped up and provided for the community and for the students. And the fact that our youth are going through a huge mental wellness crisis right now, the fact that they cater to the neurodivergent and youth with mental health struggles, I think those were big points for me. And again, I loved how you said that, DJ. I was completely dancing in the grays with this. And so they got, they scored pretty high on my categories as well.
Anyone else like, oh, go ahead.
I hear what Savita and DJ are saying. I don't see it. And maybe I need to go back through and read this all again. Overall, I feel like there was almost too much information provided that it made it hard for me to understand what they're doing and who they're trying to reach and why. I hear, for me, the gray was not a happy place. The gray was a difficult place for me to kind of weed through and figure out what it is that they're doing and why and where's the intention and all of that. Now, I think this would be super awesome. And I do, in theory, like the idea. It's just hard for me to wrap my head around all of it. So I'm gonna reread this one thoroughly.
Mia, I just want to add that as you are rereading, I want to remind you all as panelists that you were invited for your lenses and your experiences. And so whereas sometimes you all have been impacted by some knowledge from other folks, just remember that you are also coming with your own perspectives and your own expertise and knowledge about what might fit. And then also to just emphasize the piece around the eligibility requirement and the emphasis that Thrive is putting on the leadership and the around who's the leadership and is that representative, because I've heard in multiple cases today where that was an issue for many of you as panelists. So just want to make sure we don't stray from that that goal of Thrive as we are looking at the applications.
For me, for this specific application, that was a big concern, that I just didn't see leadership reflected in what I could gather was the community that they're looking to serve.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the main things that it's one of the top things that is mentioned in the Thrive Grant around working towards leadership and with leadership. And I think you and Ursula are on the same page around that. I think it's what Ursula also brought up. So I just want to I just want to put that in the space and in the room. So.
Yes, thank you, Priscilla. I was going to mention something similar to that. The other thing I'll mention is just a reminder, we are not working on consensus. It's fine for you to rethink something based on what a panelist has said, but don't feel like you have to change your score at the same time. So this is great if we have different points of view. And that is our time on this application. We have reached the full 10 minutes, so please finalize your scores. And while you're finalizing your scores, that does not, take, the time starts when you are start giving your commentary on the application, and then we will stop commentary at that time. So while you're finalizing Uprise Circus, Bengali Music Group of Austin is next up on deck, but I'll give you all a few moments to finalize your scores on the previous one. And again, for those in attendance, we do have a 3-day panel review. So this is the second day, something that's a little bit different than how we have done panels in the past here at the Cultural Arts Division is once we score all, or once a panel scores all 59 applications, we will go back and look to decide who the top 35 will be, taking those scores into consideration, seeing this is with y'all's scores, how the top 35 came out, and then discuss if that is the case. So there is time for them to relook this evening before we convene for the third and final day tomorrow. So with that being said, the next application up for review is Bengali Music Group of Austin. Sabita and DJ are our primary and secondary. And Sabita, whenever you're ready to begin.
Thank you. So this was an application where it was a little difficult to get some of the information. So the work that the group is doing, the type of programs that they describe, fantastic. But when I look at it in terms of what is required of the Thrive Grant and what our guidance has been, I found a few areas where information was lacking. And for that reason, this particular application is scored on the lower end of my scale, so to say. So the areas where I could have used more information from this applicant, one was in the cultural leadership piece. So as an Indian American, I can look at names and kind of say, oh, they are from these particular communities because that's just my history. But the proposal did not call out whether the leadership was part of the Bengali diaspora, which is what the organization is serving. So that was a flag for me. The other place was about intersectionality and inclusion. The proposal is very clear on meeting the needs of the Bengali diaspora. However, not much information on intersectionality and inclusion there. And the other section where I felt that the proposal was lacking in detail was in the opportunity creation. Could not figure out exactly what the long-term benefit these programs will have for the Bengali diaspora or to the greater Austin community. I could have used a little bit more context over there. And then lastly, as far as the cultural institution status goes, significant amount of the funding was allocated to additional programming, not necessarily to strengthening operations. And so that was another area where I could have used more information. So those were the key points that I had made. Back to you, Jesus.
Thank you, Savita. Secondary, DJ?
Savita is so thorough in her analysis. It makes it difficult for me to follow her on this because she has checked off already all of my concerns and brought up a few more that I had not considered as someone who's not a member of the South Asian community, and understanding how the names and kind of inform where people come from within that community. Overall, I just feel I scored it low. I feel that the application of the grant could have been more strongly written to impart a little bit more what their goal is to kind of serve the entire community. I missed all of that. And for all the reasons that Savita said, I really have nothing else to add.
Thank you, DJ. I'd like to invite the other panelists if you have any additional comments that you'd like to add. Thank you.
Seeing as there does not appear to be any additional comments, if you would please finalize your scores. All right, next application up for review is Folklore y Ritmos de Panama. Mia and Ursula are our primary and secondary. And Mia, whenever you are ready to begin.
Okay. So for this application, I scored it kind of in the mid-range. I do think that their mission aligns with this grant program well. They have a good history, and they were clear about why it was formed in relationship to the needs of the community. Some areas that I was concerned about was the cultural leadership. It did not clearly demonstrate whether or not the leadership was comprised of people of the community. So it was just hard to understand. So I needed more information there. When it comes to the activities that they outlined, they did not clearly articulate how they were responsive to the current needs of the community. Similarly with intersectionality, they recognize the importance of intersectionality, but weren't able to show me how that manifests for the organization, and how it manifests in an intentional way. So I just needed more information about how they make sure that intersectionality is woven throughout all aspects of their organization and their programming. And then accessibility, there wasn't much beyond what is required by the ADA. Yeah, that's my overall notes.
Thank you, Mia. Secondary, Ursula.
I'm having a similar issue as before. Is Mia did such a eloquent job. Those were all my main notes as well. My biggest note was the cultural leadership. I was looking for more information, and that was not presented. And also accessibility did seem like the bare minimum of ADA accessibility. So overall, my notes are pretty identical to theirs.
We'd like to invite other panelists who haven't spoken. Mhm. DJ, you trying to? Okay, we'll give you a second. You're on mute still. So wait.
Okay, I just wanted to cheerlead once again for this organization. I concur with what has been said, but I do want to point out that they have, like many other organizations, I was touched by the resiliency that they displayed, especially in light of the challenges, the multitude of challenges that they face that would take out many better funded organizations. And so I am cheerleading for the little guy in the sense that I want to acknowledge their resiliency and express to them that their work does matter. I have seen performances by this group. They're beautiful. And regardless of outcomes, the grant could have been written stronger and had more through lines to express how their work is impacting the community. But having said that, it is a wonderful organization worthy of support, and I wanted to acknowledge that.
I just wanted to call out one section where opportunity creation that I thought was unique to this particular proposal was where they call out that they have places where food vendors from Cuba, who serve foods from different parts of the Central American geography are invited to their food space, so to say, and they talk about as a creative opportunity for job creation. And I thought that was a really interesting approach and good proposal. But I do agree with the fact that there is no explicit description in the cultural leadership piece, which connects you back to the community, the leadership connected back to the community, though it's clear that there is passion and longevity and community connection here.
Thank you, panelists. If there are no further comments, if you would please finalize your scores. All right, and our next application up for review is Glass Half Full Theater. Ursula and Savita are our primary and secondary. And Ursula, whenever you're ready to begin.
Right. I was initially impressed by the potential of using, to me, it's a pretty rare art form. I don't see a lot of puppetry in at least the art scenes that I participate in, and I really appreciate how they describe the amount, or they're using this as a tool to address complex issues and intersectionality. I agree with how they describe that, and I think there's a lot of potential there. So that was something I was impressed by, and is why I gave them a high score for their mission. Let's see, trying to find. Cultural leadership. I'm trying to find my notes for this one. Cultural leadership. I did a few points off because it didn't fully represent the range of the community they listed that they're targeting. There wasn't an exact representation of the leadership compared to who they wanted to serve. And again, I was paying most attention to that throughout this process. And again, that affected the intersectionality and inclusion, just having that represented through who the kids they're working with and seeing are going to be represented at highest echelons of the program. But I did appreciate their accessibility. And overall, I mostly had an impression of this is a really unique approach, and so for me that held a lot of value. I'm impressed that they have such a great history of service. So overall, I gave it to a mid to high score.
Great, thank you, Ursula. Secondary, Savita.
So this was one of those proposals that scored really high in my world. I thought this was a very unique approach, as Ursula said, bringing in puppetry to get to tell the story, really. A couple of points that I wanted to make was their cultural leadership is so thinking about their mission and their cultural leadership, there is a connection there, but it is also a very broad connection. Their mission is broad, the cultural leadership description is very broad. But where I was really impressed with this proposal was in their programming. They are doing the absolutely timely and relevant programs, right? It's the young girl who is being pursued by immigration agents, the mountain of trash or the ocean of trash, and then there is the piece about climate change. All of these are very, very timely, relevant, meaningful programs, and that they scored really high on my scoring sheet because of that. They have pretty strong community support, it looks like, and they are investing significantly in artistic fees, but they have also shown that they're using other funding to kind of support and grow their operations as well. So I thought that this was a group that could be supported by the Thrive Grant.
Thank you, Savita. Any other panelists have anything to add here?
I'd just like to echo what Savita just said. I also scored this one really high for this and had the same thoughts and concerns and yada, yada, yada that Savita had.
Thank you.
I just wanted to comment again. I'm a cheerleader for these applicants because these people, they're go-getters. I mean, they are hunters. And I want to commend that. You know, during the leanest of times, they were flexible, they were nimble, you know, figuring out new ways to bring in income when revenue was lost. Absolutely fantastic. You know, they started contracting to bring money in, and that just shows the passion that they have for this unique and incredible work. And I want to take a moment to commend them on that. I did score them in the low mids for many of the reasons that have already been articulated. But I'm cheering for you. I'm cheering for you.
Thank you, panelists. If there are no further comments, if you would please finalize your scores. All right, and the next application up for review is Dance Africa Fest. A reminder to the panel, there were 2 applications that had the same grant writer with the same name, so you want to make sure that you are looking at grant number 006735-GON3P8 to make sure you are looking at the correct Dance Africa Fest application. So Dance Africa Fest is the next application up to be reviewed. Mia and DJ are our primary and secondary. And Mia, whenever you are ready to begin.
Okay. So for this one, I scored it in the mid to high range. I love their mission, and they're clearly aligns with this grant program. Same with their history. I will say the name was misleading. I thought this was an event, but as I read more, obviously it is not in their year-round programming organization, but the name I was a little confused for a hot second. But some areas where I just needed a little more information, under their activities section, I needed more information about how their activities are responsive to the existing and current needs in the community, sort of like a little more detail and tie in there. When it comes to accessibility, there didn't seem to be a push for doing much more than what the ADA requires. So I would have liked to seen a little more intention there. And for the cultural institution, I felt it didn't clearly outline where funds were going to be used. I thought it was a little vague. For example, in the budget, it says a consultant, but a consultant can be a plethora of things and reasons. So I would have loved to know where's that consultant coming in and where are you looking for that strategic investment? That would have helped me better gauge kind of where you're going and where you see your organization at this point in time. but overall, I thought it was a solid application. That's all I got.
Thank you, Mia. Secondary, DJ?
I scored this application on the high side. You know, I wonder how much I have regularly seen, heard of, and even participated in years past in some of the activities. I really like that they're an organization that's almost 10 years old, again, who has traditionally lacked the funding and support from the city of Austin to maintain. I think that they are a perfect example of what the Thrive Grant is for. Cultural relevancy was, for me, was expressed in movement and the need for movement through dance, encouraging people to dance to improve their health, to improve their understanding, and to reconnect with their cultural roots within the African diaspora, which is essential and is constantly at risk of cultural erasure, not only in this city, but in this state and in this country. And so for those reasons, I scored them high. I do agree that the accessibility statement could have been stronger, but that was really my only opportunity for criticism for this grant.
Thank you. We'd like to invite other panelists to add anything here. Sabita, Ursula?
Yeah, I did not score this. Well, I should say I appreciated the grant application and the programs that they're doing. The reason why my scores didn't end up in the high range is because of the cultural leadership section. There is only one person that is mentioned in this cultural leadership. For the African diaspora, that feels very limiting. Like, that is a huge continent. There are so many people. Clearly, there is all kinds of dance and music and activities being described, but the leadership is one person. And that, for me, reduced their score significantly. Maybe there is a board, maybe there is a committee, maybe there are supporting members of the organization that help out from all of these different countries or with these lineages, and that could have been described in the application, and it was not. So that was the main reason why the overall score came down in my scoring. And then the other pieces that Mia mentioned, I want to second that the budget could have used a little more information on exactly how they were going to use these funds. And intersectionality, again, was another area where I thought it was lacking in the description. Yep.
If I can just...
go ahead.
Sorry.
DJ, would you like to add something, or do you want to let Ursula speak and then you want to?
Please
why
let Ursula
why don't we
go
give
and I'll-
Ursula an opportunity since we're on the 10-minute time?
Oh, I just wanted to also say that the cultural leadership was the main for me, just because of only seeing one leader for such an extensive program that seems to have a lot of moving parts and representation of such a broad community. It wasn't represented as far as like, how can one person have the voice of such a broad cultural experience. That was my main concern.
Thank you. DJ, you want to?
Yes, and
Oh,
an abundance of respect and for my fellow panelists, but I did want to advocate and say the negative, it can look like a negative that it's one person, but when you look at the longevity and the scope of work that she's been able to provide, being one person with no funding, with no material funding from the city of Austin. Again, I would like to just stress that I would love for us to have the opportunity to look at things through a broader lens. When we were, some people are better grant writers than others. Some people can afford to pay grant writers. But to have that type of longevity with absolutely no support and being one person and relying almost 100% on volunteers, but still making an impact in the city of Austin the way that this organization has, I would just encourage my fellow panelists to take that into a deeper consideration when they're, and not see that as a negative, but as a positive, as to the level of resiliency and care that one person has taken to maintain this organization for so long.
And I wanted to also emphasize what you just said, DJ. I sit on a board where there is one staff person in the organization, and I can tell you that that one staff person does miracles with what they're able to do. And while, yes, technically I'm on the board of directors, I am not much help, and I'm not the ultimate decision maker. That decision-making power lands with that staff person. So I didn't see it as a negative that it was one person, because it's one person that has been very deeply ingrained in the community. So just wanted to say that.
I really appreciate both of your feedback around that, and it definitely will impact my score. So thank you for that perspective.
Any further comments from the panel? If there are no further comments, if you would please finalize your scores. All right, we're finalizing our scores on that one and then moving on to the next application, Outreach Productions. DJ is our sole primary on this one right now. So DJ, whenever you are ready to begin.
Okay, for Outreach Productions, I scored this organization in the high range. My key takeaways that I really appreciated from this proposal was how they were able to leverage their relationships to really get training from better situated nonprofits who could help them hone their skills. So that showed a willingness to learn and to be taught. And I thought that that was expressed very well in their grant proposal, that even though they didn't have money to go out and get this training, they did use their capital, their relationships was their capital, and they used their currency and they used it well. So I want to commend them for that. Oral tradition is a very important thing in the African-American community, and it is an art form that is being lost. Much of our cultural history is articulated through oral tradition, and to find an organization committed to formalizing that on behalf of the East Austin constituency and the surrounding areas, because they express that they go outside of East Austin to do their programming. A strong commitment to accessibility, wanted to commend them on that as well, going beyond the ADA requirements. And my only concern for them is that the Thrive grant would not necessarily cement them as a cultural institution beyond the fact that they do have longevity without those funds. Again, another organization doing miracles without much money. It would stabilize them. So I saw that as something that was worthy of scoring them in the middle range on that key element. And that's my comments on that.
We don't have a secondary, so we would invite other panelists to comment at this time. I'm looking at y'all. All right, if nobody has anything the only thing go ahead. Go ahead. Is it?
Oh,
go ahead.
I just agree that I was really impressed with their accessibility, their attention to accessibility and building it into the program, and I'll support it for similar reasons.
Thank you. And I would just like to add that when we're thinking about small organizations and small folks and receiving funds, that sometimes an organization receiving funds can leverage the opportunity for other funding. So that's really important, something to consider. And it's a question that is often asked of grants, of people who are pursuing grants. How did this help you leverage other funding? And so we want to think of the funds that could possibly come from a Thrive grant, the impact that they could have on, just by the mere fact of getting any portion of the fund would be helpful to folks. So.
Other comments from panelists? I want to follow up a little bit with what Priscilla said, but I want to give others a chance to comment if they have any comments that have not already been stated. So just, kind of a reminder with the cultural institution status that it's moving towards cultural institution status. And again, staff has not reviewed these applications in depth, but if stabilization is, a stepping stone towards that, the question in the application is how will these funds be used to move your organization closer to becoming a cultural institution? So just keep their response in mind when you are scoring the application in that particular section. With that being said, are there any further comments from the panel? Seeing as there are none, if you would please finalize your scores. And then we are on track to end probably about 30 minutes early. We're scheduled to go till 4. Looks like we're on track to be done around 3:30. So let's take a break for about 10 minutes. It's 2:35 right now. So we will be back at 2:45. So if we can pause the recording. All right, and we are back from break. So we are continuing the Thrive Review panel. The next application up for review, and let me get my timer ready. Next application up for review is going to be Spectrum Theater Company. Ursula and DJ are our primary and secondary. And Ursula, whenever you're ready to begin.
All right. I was very impressed by the mission and the programming that they list in this proposal. And overall, it seems like they have a great representation of cultural or of community support, and I appreciate that they're where are my notes? Here we go. I appreciate that their service to the community beyond theater productions. I think that differentiates them from some the other theater proposals that we got. And my main concern, again, is the broadness of cultural leadership description. They don't go into any detail of the exact members of the board, their cultural backgrounds, and saying that they represent the diversity of Austin. So that left me with a few questions, especially because of the mission being driven by the African American experience. It seems incredibly important that the leadership reflects the community that they're not only serving, but projecting and promoting at the same time. So that was my main concern, and the only place where they really lost points from me.
Thank you, Ursula. Secondary, DJ?
Okay, this application scored high for me. And again, I fall back on, you have varying levels of ability in grant writing, and part of our instruction in the orientation was that we could take that into account, that sometimes the grant writing might not be as strong in one area if it's conveyed overall. And they do say in the application, in another part of the application, that they are made up of both men and women, from the predominantly from the African American, but inclusive of the white community as well. Takeaways for me is the ability for them, the longevity of the organization, one. Again, operating with very little funding. And a key question that I have that I'd like to point out to my fellow panelists, just in case they hadn't considered this, and I'm not saying that you haven't, but just in case, is sometimes these organizations, if not them, then who? If they are one of a kind organization in a city that boasts over 1 million people, but you have one organization fulfilling the role of an entire community single-handedly, and if they continue to go unfunded and continue to go unrecognized, and they disappear, which the Thrive Grant wishes to prevent through cultural erasure or displacement, if not them, then who? And I haven't seen another application that does the work of the same caliber that this organization does, with the longevity and the prominence of this organization. And for those reasons, I scored them highly, and hope sincerely that they receive a grant. Thank you.
At this time, we'd like to invite other panelists to add any additional comments.
I scored this in the mid to low range. I had concerns about the leadership of the organization, like Ursula. It does, you're right, DJ, it does say that it's representative, and it says Black and white and men and women, but to me that doesn't tell me exactly where's that, how is that breaking out, to be able to accurately say this is representative of the community that they're looking to serve. So for me, that's, they lost some points in that way. There were some other small pieces about accessibility that I felt were missing. One of them being language translation. And I did not see enough information provided about how their programming is responsive to the needs of the community. So, but yeah.
Any other comments from the panel? If there are no further and I did want to offer one bit of A bit of a clarification on what DJ was mentioning earlier. In the orientation, we do instruct the panelists to look beyond grantsmanship to the extent possible. So that is what DJ was referring to when she mentioned that earlier. If the information is in there, but maybe in a different question, you can keep that in consideration if you are able to eventually find the information you need to score the application. With that being said, if there are no final comments, if you would please finalize your scores. All right, as we're finalizing our scores on that one, the next application up for review is Salvage Vanguard Theater. Savita and Mia are our primary and secondary. And Savita, whenever you're ready to begin.
Thank you. This was a difficult application for me to score because as a longtime Austin resident, of course, I know of Salvage Vanguard Theater. But at the same time, reading the application and the specifics of the specific answers to the questions or the prompts, it felt very broad and not necessarily connected to the audiences that the Thrive Grant is looking to support. So that's where my that's where I'm struggling, and I am looking forward to the discussion with my panelists and the colleagues here to get a better understanding of how they are viewing this application. But across the board, I mean, clearly valuable work, bringing together the right types of avant-garde theater, the proponents of that, the practitioners of avant-garde theater. It's all great. My concern keeps coming back to how do I connect it back to the Thrive Grant and the cultural erasure piece. The segments that I thought were interesting were the partnership, for example, with the number of different Austin organizations that they partner with, and the job creation piece of it, where they encourage artists to participate and create content that is valuable for the greater Austin community. They did not provide much information beyond ADA and ASL for a performance on the accessibility scale, so that was not something that I could score them highly on. So overall, I'm not very clear on how exactly this proposal ties back to the Thrive Grant, and so that is where I am right now.
Thank you, Savita. Secondary, Mia?
I had similar feelings to Savita. I had a hard time connecting this to the goals of the Thrive Grant. It was not clear to me if their whole focus is supporting communities at risk of cultural erasure and what those communities are. So with that lens, I had a hard time moving through it. It did seem clear to me that the organization certainly wasn't founded to support communities that were at risk of cultural erasure. So it may have developed over time, but again, there's just a lack of information and understanding there. Same with leadership. I had concerns about their leadership and whether it represents communities that are at risk of cultural erasure, because I don't know if they serve. It's kind of like a loop. all of my concerns are feeding back to, I'm not sure. And there wasn't enough information provided to me to understand if they are indeed in line with the priority to give organizations funds that support, that's focuses on communities that are at risk of erasure. So.
Thank you.
I too had a hard time with the broadness of the description. Something that I really wished had been clearly defined is the backgrounds of the directors that are actually dictating the stories that are being told. There was no clear information. There was a lot of conversation around, oh, we are hiring a diverse group of people, but especially in theater, it seems pretty important to know who's directing the stories that are being told, and there was no acknowledgement of that, which for me was a concern with this grant in particular.
There's a through line that I think that I want to bring out, a recurrent theme, and it's not always the case. I don't want to overgeneralize, and this may not be in time for this particular grant, but moving forward for the city council members the policymakers who may be involved. Not every community has the same space to talk about their community in the same ways. It is very difficult at times for example, if you're an all African American group, there's a recurrent theme here where, we're not getting the specificity that we want in the language that's being used. And I think that some of that lies in the cultural training. I'm looking for the word, conditioning, that's the word. The cultural conditioning where it is not okay to live in Blackness and to be, to do something for Black, by Black, about Black. And so that language may go a little soft in those areas. I'm not saying that's always the case, but I am saying that that does happen, and it happens often. And I know that we have Priscilla Hale on here, who is much better versed, equipped to discuss this than I am, but I wanted to make that point that through line seems to be carrying, especially for applicants who are serving the African-American, heavily serving the African-American community. There's a softness there that may not exist in other applications, and we need to explore further why that is. Thank you.
Thank you, DJ. Good comments and thoughts for us to consider, both for the panel as you're scoring applications, and as we visit this pilot program. This is the first year that Thrive has launched, so we will be taking various thoughts into consideration for future iterations of this program. With that being said, are there other comments from the panel? If there are no further comments, if you would please finalize your scores. All right, next application up for review is What's in the Mirror. Mia is our primary. We do not have a secondary at this time for What's in the Mirror. So Mia, whenever you are ready to begin.
Okay. For this application, I scored it relatively high. I thought this was one of the strongest examples of intersectionality being woven through an organization in all areas. I thought that they made a very clear connection as to their community and how it's facing cultural erasure. Some areas that I needed a little more information. There seemed to be not enough information provided about how their community supports them in non-financial ways. There was lots of talk about how they support them financially, but I didn't see a lot of information about how that manifests in other ways. And similar to the opportunity creation, I was looking for more clear and connected short and long-term benefits of the organization and for the community, and I just needed a little more detail there. Yeah, other than that, though, I thought it was a strong application. I don't really have much more to say.
Given that there's not a secondary, we will invite the rest of the panelists to chime in here.
So this is the through line that DJ mentioned, right? Whether it's the Bengali Association where they don't explicitly state that the leadership is Bengali, or the other organization that we were just talking about where only one person is mentioned in the cultural leadership section. It's the same thing. I absolutely love the work that they're doing. I thought it was a very strong proposal. But if I am to do this, but I have evaluated all of them on that basis that have they provided me, a complete outsider, with sufficient information to understand who is in the leadership roles. The gentleman leading the organization absolutely checks off every single box that the organization is looking for, but there is absolutely no additional information about board members or others who are supporting the organization. I did not look at the website to look for this information. I'm just going off of what is in the grant proposal. So that was an area where I did score this particular application low, but everything else, the work that they're doing is phenomenal.
I also gave this proposal higher. I was also impressed by the intersectionality of the mission and how they're putting it into action. Something that left me wanting more was examples and descriptions of how they're weaving art, creativity, and mental health. I was looking for a little more examples of concrete past activities, or if not what they've already done, what they're hoping to do, with a little more deliberate description would have been really helpful for me. But overall, I did very much appreciate the mission and how they describe the community support.
Any further comments from the panel?
I just wanted to commend the organization for the work that they're doing. And again, when you look at the landscape, if they're not the only ones in this space, they're one of a very few, and that matters.
Thank you, panelists. If there are no further comments, if you would please finalize your scores. All right, and the next application up for review is Mexicarte Museum. Ursula and DJ are our primary and secondary. And Ursula, whenever you are ready to begin.
Right. Thank you for your patience. Trying to find my note. But I do remember that this is one that I want to take another look at because of our earlier discussion about funding. They seem to have a really strong support and funding currently, and I had not had the same perspective after our conversation earlier today. So it is something that I want to revisit. I scored it very high because I appreciated their focus on how much they want to create a digital history and longevity in their cultural heritage, and they had really descriptive and concise examples of how they wanted to do that, which was really helpful for me in understanding how deliberate they are in their mission and focus. They offered a lot of great information that, oh gosh, sorry, my notes aren't showing that. But the overall mission was impressive. Unfortunately, I would like a second to try to find my notes because what I thought I was bringing up is not happening, but I did give them a very high score. So if I can go a second, I'd really appreciate the time to try to find my exact notes.
Yes, that's fine. While you're doing that, secondary, you can start giving your commentary, DJ.
Well, I scored them in the high range because, you know, they've had a long time to get it right and they don't disappoint. This is one of the strongest nonprofit organizations that I know of in the Austin community with the longevity and the support that they have. And, you know, they just do a lot of good, have done historically and continue to do a lot of good in the community. So for me, this is an example of how grants are written to help people who are underserved and under-resourced, but it ends up going to the people who already have the most resources and the most support. That is no fault of the organization. They're just doing a lot of the right things to be there. But the questions persist with me. How do we help bring other people up to that level if the cream rises to the top and there's nothing left at the bottom? So I gave them the score I felt they deserved, which is a high score, which was what I was tasked to do. But let me be on the record for saying, a lot of organizations at risk of cultural erasure or of disappearing from the landscape might benefit more from these funds at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, DJ. Ursula, did you have more commentary?
That was exactly what I was trying to say from our previous conversation about funding. It's something that I would like to take a second lens, but I think it's demonstrated in their cultural leadership. Their cultural leadership are stacked with professionally accomplished people. It's really impressive, and also it speaks to their grant writing style, because these are people who have had 25 plus years in the same industry, and it really shows. So that was, I really appreciate just having the mission of like, they're very resourced and it shows. And I think I need to take a little more time to understand where the Thrive grant is appropriate for helping with cultural erasure and just the resources that they have. But overall, I mean, they're incredibly professional, and they communicated their mission very well, and they clearly serve the community and are a part of the community that they're serving.
And at this time, we'd like to invite other panelists.
So one point that has not been brought up by the others, I thought their proposal was really strong, and this is a cultural institution if there ever was one in the city of Austin. So I agree with all of that. The piece that was missing for me was in their current programming that they describe. There isn't, for a professional organization that is writing all of these grants, there was not that connection which says, okay, we're going to do these murals on 5th Street, and they are going to be talking about, this is how they connect to the current ethos, current cultural relevance. That piece was missing for me as I was looking through the grant application, but fantastic proposal.
And I'll just echo what everyone else has said. This is one of the only organizations that I've actually been to since I am not from Austin. I've actually been to this museum in one of my trips there. So I do question if they're already a cultural institution and if then it fits in for this grant program, based on everything that has already been stated. So.
Yes, and I'll just want to remind the panel, I mean, yes, I have not read the application, but from the sounds of it, it's like the proposal written was very strong, and clearly they have resources. And then so just to keep in mind that the primary purpose of these funds were to address communities and arts organizations that are at immediate risk of cultural erasure and displacement. And so I think that they're that might impact ways in which you think about the score, and not just around the grantsmanship of the grant writing that happened, and the ability to express themselves in a way that other folks may not have been as well. So just to remember that that's one of the top eligibility and things that we want to be looking at.
Nice.
I know can cause a juxtaposition, right, around what you do with that. I think DJ kind of put it like out there. So. But go ahead.
It's clear that the work that they do is protecting cultural erasure in XYZ community, but it's just the juxtaposition against, are they already a cultural institution? Which I guess there's only one place in this grant application to acknowledge that and grade accordingly. So I guess that's kind of, as us as panelists, that's kind of how we have to look at it.
Thank you, Priscilla. Thank you, panelists. Other comments for this application? If there are no further comments, if you would please finalize your scores. All right, next application up for review is Agni Foundation for the Arts. Mia and Savita are our primary and secondary. And Mia, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay. I scored this one relatively high. I thought they had a great mission, history, very clear that their leadership reflects the community that they're serving. I thought they had a very clear outline of how they intend to use the funds. Some areas where I just had a little pause and I needed a little more information was how their activities are responsive to the current needs of their community. I needed more information about how intersectionality is a core focus of the organization. It was not clear based on what was provided. Let me see. And then with the opportunity section, they provided a lot of performance opportunities, which I think is great. Where what I was missing was what are the long-term benefits that this organization is providing. So I just needed more information about how do they see themselves as, you know, making systemic change or whatever in their community. Other than that, I thought this was a pretty strong application. Yeah.
Thank you, Mia. Secondary, Savita.
Thank you. Agree with the points that Mia made. A couple of things that I wanted to highlight. So the organization talks about programming in 2 different languages, Hindi and Tamil. For those of you who are not from the subcontinent, this is an important piece of information because this means this is the entire subcontinent, given how diverse the languages are and the opportunities are to be able to offer programming in both Hindi, which is primarily a North-focused language, and Tamil, which is a Southern-focused language. Politically and from a cultural standpoint, that is an important piece to have Hindi and Tamil. So that I give kudos to them that they're thinking about both of those. I thought that the application was pretty strong. One thing that I thought was interesting in the intersectionality piece is, given how popular Bollywood is and the music and the dance, and pretty much everybody is aware of Bollywood music, using that as a way to bring others into the community and to make them aware of the South Asian and the Indian diaspora. I thought that was an interesting angle that they highlighted in this grant application. Again, I echo what Mia said, clearly large number of opportunities for performance, for production, but what is the larger impact, longer term impact on the community, whether it's South Asian or not? That was the piece that could be expanded a little bit more in the grant application. I think I also scored this application on the higher scale.
Okay, we'd like to invite other folks to chime in here. Do you have anything else to add, panelists?
I scored this organization in the middle. And I think part of my challenge was in reading through the applications. And again, I know every application deserves to be scored separately. And I committed myself to doing that, but this was probably the 5th or 6th one of its kind. And at a point, it just kind of bled together for me. I don't know how much of the community, the South Asian community, the population, the South Asian community makes up, but it was a large number for me. I know I read at least 4 different applications that kind of centered maybe on different pieces, and I'm not culturally steeped enough to say, and Savita, I thank you for all of the input and the guidance that you continue to give around that. But it became a little difficult for me to separate the same activities for the same, very similar activities being promoted for this community. And I'd like to hear, especially from you, Savita, where those differences and nuances may lie. I did not grade this particular applicant based off of that. I'm just expressing out loud that this was a challenge where I had to go back and review several times to make sure I wasn't confusing what they were doing with the other group that was very similar to them that was doing, and so forth and so on.
And I also appreciate what DJ says, because I came up against a similar reaction just because there were a couple of applications that even cited that the population was growing in Austin. And that for me was a contradiction to the concept behind this grant specifically. And so it was kind of difficult to read that a couple of times, that this community is growing and we're talking about erasure. So I didn't know how to represent that in my scoring necessarily, but it was something that continued to be at odds with how do I reconcile an acknowledgement that these communities are thriving, but also that there's a lot of nuances to keeping the culture alive.
I just would like to add something here. I think when I'm hearing or seeing that they were talking about the communities were growing, that could be the number of folks that are here representing various South Asian communities. But I think the Thrive Grant, when it's thinking about erasure, it doesn't mean are there more people coming here. One of the concepts around people coming to a place and staying in a place, continuing to stay in a place, is that they have access to like cultural production and artistic expression, places in which they can socialize. So I think when I heard you say you didn't know how to score that, Ursula, I think we want to make sure that we're not scoring on the fact that more South Asians are moving here, but we want to score on the cultural production, the artistic piece. So, and I'm wrapping up because I know there might be something from you.
If I have a moment, the other piece is that it is such a diverse subcontinent. Like even just the Indian subcontinent is so diverse. What happens in the north versus what happens in the south versus what happens in it's like the African diaspora. So thinking about it that way, true, overall, the number of South Asians is increasing, but the specific slivers of South Asians who want to keep track of their culture, their heritage, their particular dance forms or art forms, I think that's the piece that that I was thinking about. That broadly, yes, 7% of the Austrian population is South Asian. I think one of the grant applications mentions that. Therefore, you want to be thinking about the divisions within their specific to each community that makes up the broad South Asian diaspora.
All righty, thank you.
Can
And
I
we
just add-
are we are at time for this application, so unfortunately. Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. We at time?
I thought I saw 1 minute finger.
Okay, I think we're at time, but Priscilla, go ahead and complete your
Yeah, I
comments.
just wanted to say that taking into context, thinking about when we were talking about one person representing the African continent, I think it's very much like Savita said around these folks. There's Bengali, there's like, if you're not aware of those cultures, you may not know that. So it is, and so just take where there was multiple conversation, there was a conversation about that earlier. I think we want to take that same thing into context here.
Great, thank you, Priscilla. Good, good advice, good thought. So yes, with that in mind, please finalize your scores, panelists, and we will move on to our final application of the day, but please finalize your scores on this particular application first. Okay, and as we're getting ready, the next application is listed as DBA in the portal system. That's how you'll see it. This is Raisin in the Sun. We have just a primary for this one currently. Ursula, you are the primary for DBA. And the 10-minute time limit will begin whenever you start your comments, Ursula.
I'm excited to hear what everyone thinks of this because I know that I am probably a bit biased because I am a mural. I get to see firsthand the impact that public art and mural making with children has. So for me, I scored this fairly high because I think that murals have just in the form have a great accessibility aspect to it because there's no financial barrier to experience it. And I think that it's a unique art form that can, and when kids participate, it's a great opportunity for them to be really brave and bold and see their existence on the outside of themselves, which can be incredibly impactful. I think that the communities they talk about are broad, and I would have liked a little more examples and clarity other than just people of color and women. I would have appreciated a little more expansion and description on that. I was also a bit concerned about the cultural leadership, having just 2 people leading this entire program. I guess that was a continuation of this seems like a big program? Are 2 people enough? Is everybody represented with those 2 people? I don't think so, not with who they're talking about targeting. So I did take a couple of points off the bat. I also did score the cultural institution status pretty low just because the section didn't feel answered. It was really broad and there were no details or specifics. So this was like a medium to high score for me. And I would love to hear more from everyone.
There's not a secondary, so this time we invite the other panelists to speak.
At the risk of being the broken record in the room, here's another example. I mean, it is not a coincidence that if there are 10 applicants who are supporting African-American causes in the city of Austin, where we know there continues to be a serious problem with funding this community, my community, for which we all pay taxes. It's a continuation. This cannot be overlooked. It just cannot be overlooked. That time after time, these organizations that have a specific desire to serve the African-American community is made up of 1 or 2 people. Time after time, they're being penalized for cultural institutional status because of that. And if we cannot find a way to address this, we've missed the point. Because if we think that in a city the size of Austin, the only demographic that continues to decline is the African-American community. And we've said time and time again that culture is a way for people to cement their roots and to mirror themselves and to know that they belong in the community in which they reside. And I'm going to continue to stress that, that has to be or should be a major consideration when we're looking at how we're scoring and viewing these organizations that continue to persist in spite of and not because of. Thank you.
Mia, Sabita, do you have anything?
Some things that I wanted to point out. I hear what you just said, DJ, and I honor that. There are some areas where I really was left with, I just don't have information. And one of them being like, how will these funds, grow your organization? There is very broad statements of the funds will help us grow capacity, but like, what does that mean? Because capacity for one organization is very different for capacity for another organization. And like, I just would like to have a better sense that they have a better sense of where they need to go in that regard, because that would help me like understand that they understand their current place and where they need to be moving towards. I had some concerns about accessibility. And I understand mural art is a little tricky because it's in a public place. There wasn't much information provided here for accessibility and how they, intend to tackle that. There was just pieces throughout that I would ask how. Like, I think the statement is good and I'm sure they have the answer to that, but it just didn't make it into this, which makes it really hard to grade and like really hard to score, because I need a little bit more and a little more detail, and that would help me piece together the answers. So
Sarita, do you have anything?
I echo Mia because I have been trying to read and reread the application again, but again, it's a very broad statement of supporting East Austinites. It does not specify which particular community. And if you don't know that the leadership is from a certain community, then it doesn't really, it did not connect the dots for me. So going back to DJ's point, is there anything at all that the city of Austin can provide to help make these applications a little stronger and provide this kind of information, or give us different guidance so that we are not looking at just what is provided for us in this grant application, because we do need to be fair on that piece as well. But how do you interpret, how do you understand? I think it would help us and help the grant applicants as well to get a little bit more training around this.
Thank you. I will add something here. I think Mia and Savita, I think your comments are really helpful for this applicant as well as maybe others around that when the things aren't there, it's easier, it's a little harder for the score. And so I think that is something that can be addressed, you know, in terms of making sure that this applicant and others provide information that is missing so that you could get that. And then I want to, Ursula, I know that you mentioned around the fact that 1 or 2 folks are there. And I want to remind us again that there's 2 things. These funds are meant, it's called Thrive. So therefore, about thriving is growing and or developing. And so we really want to keep that in mind when we're thinking about scoring. And we also want to take into the fact that organizations that were applying for these funds were asked about their work over the past 5 years. And one of the things that could be taken into context is if they've been doing this work for 5 years, it doesn't matter whether there's been 1 person or 1 unpaid person. And so really think about, you know, sometimes 1 person is doing the work of 10 and we don't know how. And one of the things that happen is those people on the long term are not sustainable, not just because of funding, but because they can't keep carrying it on, but how funding would support that. And so we want to be very open about it. You know, there's nothing that says how many folks need to be leading something. If the work has been being done, I think we want to commend and we want to uplift organizations and or people who have made it happen in spite of. So I just wanted to put that in this space.
Thank you, Priscilla. I think we have about a minute left. Any final comments on this application? Ursula? No? Okay.
I'm sorry, you asked.
Oh,
Ursula.
I know, right? I've had the same issue every time we say your name. I want to just reiterate that it wasn't like the number is one thing. I didn't see a very clear expression of the cultural background of the female leader of the leadership that was described. And I think that gave me a bit of a pause because I was trying to decipher, does she represent the community that she's serving? Because I'm not seeing any description beyond her impressive resume. So that for me was part of why I was confused.
Thank you, Ursula. That is time on this application. So if you would please finalize your scores. And that is our final application for the day. So we can stop the recording. Well, before we stop the recording, we will have a 3rd day of review panels tomorrow. That concludes our panel for today, Tuesday, January 24th, 2023.